The dashboard clock read 6:43 a.m. when Officer Garrett Blackwell pulled his patrol car out of the Portland Police Bureau's East Precinct parking lot. Steam rose from the cooling towers of the nearby power plant, twisting into the October sky like ghosts. The streets were still dark, still quiet, the kind of quiet that used to mean something to him back when he believed silence held answers. Now it just meant the day had started. Garrett adjusted the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of his own face. 64 years old, 42 of them spent wearing this badge. The lines around his eyes had deepened over the years, carved by things he'd seen, things he'd chosen not to see, and things he'd been too late to prevent. His hair, once dark brown, had gone completely gray 5 years ago. Right around the time Margaret died, he looked away. The radio crackled to life. All units, this is dispatch. Good morning. Special notation for today's roster. A pause, then the dispatcher's voice took on a lighter tone, the kind people use when they think they're being encouraging. Officer Garrett Blackwell, East Precinct, Patrol Unit 7. 21 days until retirement. Garrett reached for the radio, his thumb hovering over the response button. 3 weeks. 504 hours if he wanted to count it that way. And he had been counting, every single one. He didn't respond to dispatch. What was there to say? Instead, he shifted the car into drive and headed toward his patrol route. Northeast Portland, the same streets he'd been driving for 2 decades. Every corner held a memory. That intersection where he'd pulled over a drunk driver who turned out to be a kid from his daughter's high school. That parking lot where he'd found a homeless veteran frozen to death one February morning. That coffee shop where Margaret used to meet him on his breaks back when she was still healthy enough to drive. The city hadn't changed much, but Garrett had. He turned onto any Fremont Street, the headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. A few early commuters passed by, their faces illuminated briefly by streetlights. Everyone rushing somewhere, everyone with purpose. Garrett used to have purpose. He remembered his first day on the force. 22 years old, fresh from the academy, convinced he was going to make a difference, convinced that the badge meant something beyond medal and rules and paperwork. He'd saved his first life within 6 months. A missing child wandering near the interstate at night. Garrett had been driving home after his shift when something told him to take a different route. Just a feeling, an instinct. He'd found the boy sitting on a guardrail crying for his mother. Trust your gut, his training officer had told him afterward. The job isn't just about following protocol, it's about knowing when to listen to what you feel. Garrett had believed that once. But 42 years of bureaucracy, paperwork, and departmental politics had a way of beating the instinct out of a person. Somewhere along the line, he'd stopped trusting his gut, started trusting the rule book instead, started showing up, doing his hours, going home. The job had become just that, a job. And now it was almost over. The dashboard clock clicked to 6:51 a.m. Garrett reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He'd been carrying it for weeks now, ever since the retirement paperwork had been finalized. He unfolded it carefully, though he had already memorized every word. Officer Garrett Blackwell, badge number 2847, years of service 42, effective retirement date November 5th. November 5th. He'd turn in his badge, turn in his gun, turn in his uniform. And then what? Go home to an empty house, watch television, maybe take up fishing, like everyone kept suggesting. Maybe visit Nora in Boston, though she'd made it clear over the years that his visits weren't exactly welcome. He folded the paper again and shoved it back into his pocket. A memory surfaced unbidden. Margaret's funeral, 5 years ago. The rain had been relentless that day, hammering against the cemetery tent, drowning out half the eulogy. Garrett had stood beside the casket in his dress uniform, staring at the flowers people kept bringing. White roses, Margaret's favorite. Nora had stood next to him, but there might as well have been an ocean between them. After the service, after everyone else had left, she'd finally spoken. "You chose the job over us, Dad." Her voice had been quiet, not angry, just factual. stating something they both knew to be true. Garrett had wanted to argue, wanted to explain that he'd been trying to provide, trying to serve, trying to do something that mattered, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down he knew she was right. He'd missed birthdays for double shifts, missed anniversaries for investigations, missed dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences and family dinners because someone needed him at a crime scene, someone needed him at a traffic accident, someone needed him somewhere other than home. Margaret had understood, or at least she'd pretended to. She'd smile and say, "That's what I signed up for when I married a cop." But Nora never understood. And after Margaret died, whatever fragile connection remained between father and daughter had dissolved completely. Now Nora lived in Boston, worked as something corporate that Garrett didn't fully understand and called maybe twice a year. Christmas and his birthday, if he was lucky. The dashboard clock read 6:58 a.m. Garrett took a slow breath and focused on the road ahead. 2 more turns and he'd be at the northern edge of his patrol zone. Then he'd loop back south, check in with dispatch at 8, grab coffee at the usual spot, and continue the routine. Just like yesterday. Just like the day before that. Just like he'd been doing for the past 5 years since Margaret passed. Going through the motions. Counting down. The radio crackled again. Unit 7 dispatch. Garrett picked up the handset. Unit 7, go ahead. Morning welfare check requested at the Laurelhurst Senior Center. Resident hasn't been answering calls. Probably nothing but family wants eyes on it. Copy that, Garrett said. En route. He made a mental note of the address and adjusted his route. Laurelhurst, that was the nice part of town. Big houses, old trees, quiet streets. The kind of neighborhood where people jogged at dawn and walked their dogs and waved at passing patrol cars. The kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. The clock hit 7 a.m. exactly. And that's when Garrett saw the dog. At first, it was just a shape in the middle of the road. Small, dark, unmoving. Garrett's foot moved instinctively to the brake. The patrol car slowed headlights, illuminating what he thought might be debris or a fallen branch. But as he got closer, the shape resolved into something living. A puppy. It stood directly in the center of any Fremont Street, right on the faded yellow line. Not wandering, not sniffing around, just standing there. Perfectly still, staring straight at Garrett's approaching car. Garrett stopped the vehicle about 10 feet away and shifted into park. He left the engine running, the headlights casting the puppy in stark white light. The dog didn't move. Garrett studied it for a moment. Border collie maybe, or some kind of mix. Dark brown and black fur, slightly messy like it had been running through brush. Ears pointed and alert. Couldn't be more than a year old if that. Small enough that a car could have easily missed it in the dark. Could have easily hit it. Garrett glanced in the rearview mirror. No traffic behind him. The street was empty. He looked forward again. The puppy still hadn't moved. Great, Garrett muttered. He turned on the patrol car's amber lights just in case someone came around the corner too fast, then opened the door and stepped out. The morning air was cold. He could see his breath. October in Portland meant rain was coming. He could smell it in the air. Garrett approached the puppy, slowly keeping his movements calm and non-threatening. He'd been bitten by enough strays over the years to know better than to rush. But as he got closer, the puppy didn't run, didn't growl, didn't even back away. It just sat down on the pavement and looked up at him. Its eyes were dark brown, intelligent, focused. Garrett stopped a few feet away and crouched down slightly, trying to make himself less imposing. "Hey there, buddy," he said quietly. His voice sounded strange in the empty street. Too soft, too gentle. He hadn't used that tone in years. "Where'd you come from?" The puppy tilted its head. Garrett scanned the area. No houses had lights on yet. No one was out walking. No cars parked nearby with anxious owners searching for a lost pet. Just empty streets and dark windows. "You lost?" Garrett asked. The puppy didn't respond, of course, just kept staring at him with those unwavering eyes. Garrett straightened up and looked around again. There was a protocol for this. Call animal control, wait for them to arrive, Let them handle it. That was the procedure. That was what the rule book said. He reached for his radio. The puppy stood up immediately and took 3 quick steps toward him. Garrett paused his hand on the radio. The puppy sat down again closer now, still watching. Look, Garrett said more firmly this time. You can't stay here. Someone's going to hit you. He gestured vaguely toward the sidewalk as if the puppy would understand. Go on. Go home. The puppy didn't move. Garrett sighed. He lowered his hand from the radio and took a step toward the patrol car. Maybe if he just drove slowly forward, the puppy would get out of the way. That usually worked with animals. They had survival instincts. They moved. But before Garrett could take another step, the puppy darted forward and positioned itself directly between him and the car. Garrett stopped. The puppy sat down again, waiting. You've got to be kidding me, Garrett said. He stepped to the left. The puppy moved left. He stepped to the right. The puppy moved right. It was blocking him, deliberately. Garrett crossed his arms and stared down at the small animal. What do you want? The puppy's tail gave a single brief wag. Not playful, not excited, just an acknowledgement, like it understood the question. Garrett shook his head. I don't have time for this. He moved around the puppy more forcefully this time, walking a wide arc to get back to the driver's side door. The puppy watched him go but didn't follow immediately. Good, Garrett thought. Maybe it's giving up. He opened the car door. A sharp bark cut through the morning air. Garrett turned. The puppy had moved again, standing in the middle of the road staring at him. Its ears were pinned forward. Alert. Urgent. It barked again, louder this time. All right, that's enough, Garrett said. He pulled his radio from his belt. Dispatch Unit 7, I've got a stray dog on any Fremont blocking traffic. Requesting animal control. Copy Unit 7. Animal Control is currently handling a call in Southeast. ETA approximately 45 minutes. Garrett looked at the puppy. 45 minutes. Understood, he said into the radio. He clipped the radio back onto his belt and leaned against the car, arms crossed. Fine. He'd wait. The sun would be up soon. Maybe someone would come out and recognize the dog. Maybe it would get bored and wander off. Minutes passed. The puppy didn't move. Garrett checked his watch. 7:08 a.m. He was supposed to be at the senior center by now for that welfare check. Dispatch would follow up soon asking for his status. He looked at the puppy again. It was still staring at him. Not aggressively, not fearfully, just staring. Like it was waiting for something. Garrett pushed off the car and walked over to it slowly. The puppy's tail wagged once. Tentative. Listen, Garrett said, keeping his voice calm. I get it. You're lost. You're scared. But I can't help you right now. Animal Control will be here soon. They'll take care of you. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a protein bar. He always kept a few in the car for long shifts. He tore open the wrapper and broke off a piece, kneeling down to place it on the pavement a few feet from the puppy. Here, he said. You look hungry. The puppy glanced at the food, then it looked back at Garrett. It didn't move toward the food, didn't even sniff it. Garrett frowned. Most strays he'd encountered would have lunged for food immediately. Hunger usually overrode everything else. But this one just sat there, ignoring the offering entirely. Suit yourself, Garrett said, standing back up. He turned and started walking toward the patrol car again. He'd just sit in the vehicle, keep the lights on, and wait for Animal Control. That was reasonable. That was following procedure. Behind him, he heard the soft patter of paws on pavement. Garrett stopped. He didn't turn around. He could feel the puppy behind him. Close. He took another step forward. The pattering sound followed. Another step. The puppy matched it. Garrett stopped again and finally turned around. The puppy sat down immediately, no more than 2 feet away. No, Garrett said firmly. Go. The puppy tilted its head. Garrett pointed toward the sidewalk. Go home. Wherever that is, go. The puppy stood up and took a step closer. Garrett's jaw tightened. He walked past the puppy, deliberately creating distance, and headed down the sidewalk. Maybe if he left the area entirely, the dog would stay near the patrol car. Animal control could find it there. He made it about 20 yards before he heard it again, that soft, rhythmic padding of paws. Garrett stopped walking and turned around slowly. The puppy was following him, not running, not hesitant, just walking step for step, maintaining the same distance. When Garrett stopped, the puppy stopped. They stared at each other. "Why are you following me?" Garrett asked quietly, not expecting an answer, just voicing the question that had been building in his mind. The puppy sat down, waiting. Garrett ran a hand over his face. This was ridiculous. He had a job to do, a welfare check to complete, a shift to finish. He didn't have time to stand in the middle of a residential street arguing with a stray dog. He turned and started walking again, faster this time, putting real distance between himself and the animal. 10 steps, 20, 30. He glanced back over his shoulder. The puppy was still there, still following, keeping pace. Garrett stopped abruptly and spun around. "What do you want from me?" His voice came out harsher than he intended. Frustrated, tired. The puppy didn't flinch. It just sat down again and looked at him with that steady, intent gaze. And for the first time, something shifted in Garrett's chest. Not recognition exactly, but something close to it, a feeling he couldn't name. This wasn't normal behavior, not for a stray, not for any dog. Garrett walked back toward the puppy slowly. When he got within a few feet, he crouched down again, studying it more carefully. No collar, no tags. Its fur was dirty but not matted. Its paws had small scratches like it had been running through rough terrain. And its eyes, those eyes held something Garrett recognized but couldn't quite place. Determination. "You're not lost, are you?" Garrett said quietly. The puppy's ears perked up slightly. "You're not looking for home." The puppy stood up and took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between them. It stopped just inches away from Garrett's boots. And then it did something that made Garrett freeze. It gently took the edge of Garrett's pant leg in its mouth. Not biting, not aggressive, just holding it. A deliberate, careful pull. Then it released and stepped back, looking up at him. Garrett's breath caught. He'd seen this before. Years ago. A K-9 demonstration at the academy. The way trained dogs communicated urgency. The way they tried to lead their handlers towards something important. But this wasn't a trained police dog. This was a puppy. A stray. Wasn't it? The puppy took several steps away from Garrett, then stopped and looked back. Its body was tense, alert, every muscle coiled with purpose. Then it ran. Not away, not randomly. It ran about 20 feet down the street, then stopped and turned around. Looking at Garrett, waiting. Garrett stood slowly, his knees protesting the movement. He didn't take his eyes off the puppy. The puppy barked once, sharp, urgent. Then it ran forward again another 20 feet and stopped. Turned, waited. The pattern was unmistakable. "You're trying to show me something," Garrett said aloud. The puppy barked again. Garrett's radio crackled. "Unit 7 dispatch. Status on that welfare check." Garrett picked up the radio, slowly, still watching the puppy. "Dispatch, I'm delayed. Give me a few more minutes." "Copy that." He clipped the radio back onto his belt. The puppy was still waiting, still staring. Garrett looked around. The street was still empty. The sky was getting lighter now, pre-dawn gray, slowly giving way to pale blue. He could hear birds starting to wake up in the trees. He looked back at the puppy. 42 years. He'd been doing this job for 42 years. And in all that time, the moments that mattered most, the saves that actually meant something, they'd never come from following the rulebook. They'd come from following his gut, from trusting his instinct. When had he stopped doing that? The puppy took another step forward, then back, a small, anxious dance. Its tail was rigid, its ears flat. It was scared, Garrett realized. Not of him, of something else. Something it had seen. Something it couldn't fix alone. "Right," Garrett said quietly. The puppy's ears perked up immediately. Garrett took a step forward. Show me. The puppy didn't hesitate. It turned and ran faster this time, heading east down Fremont Street. Garrett followed his boots, hitting the pavement in steady rhythm. The puppy stayed ahead of him, checking back every few seconds to make sure he was still following. When Garrett slowed, it slowed. When he sped up, it maintained the distance. They had gone about 2 blocks when the puppy turned sharply onto a smaller side street. Garrett followed his breath, coming a bit harder now. He wasn't 22 anymore. Running wasn't as easy as it used to be, but he kept going. The puppy led him toward Laurelhurst Park. The trees grew denser here. The sidewalk gave way to dirt paths. The morning light filtered through the branches and scattered beams. Garrett slowed as they entered the park. This area was less developed. Fewer joggers came through here. The trails were narrower, less maintained. The puppy stopped at a fork in the path and turned back to look at Garrett. Garrett caught up, breathing heavily now. Where are we going? The puppy turned left down the narrower trail, the one that led deeper into the wooded section of the park. Garrett hesitated. This was it. This was the moment where instinct and logic collided. Logic said turn back, call animal control, return to the patrol car, follow procedure, do the welfare check, finish the shift, count down the remaining days. But instinct said something was wrong, something had happened, and this puppy knew what it was. Garrett pulled out his radio. Dispatch Unit 7. Go ahead, 7. I'm at Laurelhurst Park, Northeast Section. I'm following a lead on a possible situation. There was a pause. What kind of situation? Garrett looked at the puppy, still waiting patiently on the trail ahead. I'm not sure yet. Stand by. He didn't wait for a response. He clipped the radio back and started down the trail. The puppy moved immediately, leading the way. The path narrowed further. Branches hung low, catching at Garrett's jacket. The ground was uneven roots and rocks creating obstacles. The puppy navigated it all easily, its small size an advantage. Garrett followed more carefully, watching his footing. They'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes when the puppy's behavior changed. It slowed down, stopped running ahead, started moving more cautiously, staying low to the ground. Garrett slowed too. His hand instinctively moved to rest near his radio. Something about the puppy's body language had shifted, from urgent to careful, from leading to searching. The puppy stopped completely and looked back at Garrett. Its ears were flat now, its tail tucked slightly. Fear. Garrett moved up beside it slowly and looked ahead. The trail opened into a small clearing. On the far side, the ground dropped away sharply. A ravine, not deep, maybe 15 feet, but steep, covered in brush and fallen leaves. The puppy whined, soft, almost inaudible. Garrett scanned the clearing. At first he saw nothing unusual, just trees, brush, morning light. Then his eyes caught on something. The ground near the edge of the ravine was disturbed. Not naturally, the leaves had been pushed aside in long, uneven lines, like something had been dragged, or like someone had tried to climb out and couldn't get traction. Garrett's pulse quickened. He moved closer, leaving the trail, stepping carefully around the disturbed earth. The puppy followed, pressed closer to his leg now. As he approached the edge of the ravine, he saw more. A piece of fabric, dark blue, caught on a broken branch jutting from the slope. Garrett knelt down and carefully pulled it free. A scarf, still damp, and on one corner, barely visible in the early morning light, a dark stain. Blood. Garrett's jaw tightened. He looked over the edge of the ravine. The slope was steep, dense with brush and fallen branches. But there, about halfway down, partially hidden by a cluster of ferns, movement. Just a flicker. So slight he almost missed it. Garrett's breath stopped. Someone was down there. He pulled out his radio immediately. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I have a possible medical emergency at Laurelhurst Park Ravine area off the Northeast Trail. I need paramedics and backup immediately. Copy that, Unit 7. Paramedics dispatched. What's the situation? Garrett looked down into the ravine again. He could see more now. The outline of a person lying partially hidden in the undergrowth. Possible injured civilian. Unknown status. I'm going down. Negative Unit 7, wait for backup. Garrett was already moving. He clipped the radio back and turned to the puppy. Stay here, he said firmly. The puppy whined again. Garrett began his descent using exposed roots and rocks as handholds. The slope was slippery, wet from morning dew, unstable. His boots slid once, sending small rocks tumbling down ahead of him. He caught himself on a tree trunk and kept going. Behind him, he heard scrabbling sounds. The puppy was following, sliding and scrambling down the slope in his wake. I said stay, Garrett called back. The puppy ignored him, determination overriding obedience. Garrett focused on the descent. 15 feet felt like 50. Every step had to be calculated, every handhold tested. Finally, his boots hit more level ground. He was at the bottom of the ravine in the thick of the brush and ferns. The puppy landed beside him with a small thud and immediately pushed ahead, forcing its way through the undergrowth. Garrett followed, pushing branches aside, and then he saw her. A woman, young, maybe early 30s, lying on her side in the dirt and leaves. Her dark jacket was torn, her blonde hair matted with blood from a wound near her temple. Her skin was pale, too pale. Garrett dropped to his knees beside her. Ma'am, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Can you hear me? No response. He reached for her neck fingers, finding the pulse point. For one terrible second, he felt nothing. Then there, weak, thready, but there she was alive. The puppy pressed against her other side, whining desperately now. It nuzzled her hand gently, then looked up at Garrett with those dark, knowing eyes. And Garrett understood. This wasn't a stray. This was her dog. And he'd done exactly what he'd been trying to do from the very beginning. He'd brought help. Garrett assessed her condition quickly. The head wound had clotted, but she'd lost blood. Her skin was two cold lips, faintly blue. Hypothermia setting in. He shrugged off his jacket without hesitation. The morning air bit into him immediately through his uniform shirt, but he ignored it. He draped the jacket carefully over the woman's torso, tucking it around her shoulders. The puppy Copper, he'd decided to call it, given the reddish tones in its brown fur, pressed tighter against her other side, sharing what little body heat a small dog could offer. Good boy, Garrett said quietly. Keep her warm. Copper's eyes met his briefly. Understanding passed between them. Garrett pulled his radio. Dispatch Unit 7, I've reached the victim. Female, approximately 30 to 35 years old, unconscious, head trauma, visible signs of hypothermia. Pulse is weak but present. How far out are the paramedics? ETA 12 minutes, Unit 7. Can you move her to the main trail? Garrett looked around. They were at the bottom of a 15-foot ravine. The slope was steep, unstable, slick with morning dew. The woman was unconscious and potentially had spinal injuries from the fall. Negative, and he said, too risky. We'll stay in position. Copy that. Paramedics are advised. They'll bring equipment for the extraction. Garrett clipped the radio back and turned his attention to the woman. 12 minutes. In ideal conditions, that wasn't long. But down here, with the temperature dropping and her body already showing signs of shutting down, 12 minutes could mean everything. He needed to keep her conscious, or at least try to bring her back to consciousness. Ma'am, he said, his voice firm, but not harsh. Can you hear me? I'm Officer Blackwell with Portland Police. You're going to be okay, but I need you to stay with me. No response. Her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow. Garrett checked her airway, clear. He tilted her head slightly to ensure it stayed that way, careful not to move her neck too much. Then he ran his hands along her arms and legs, checking for obvious breaks. Nothing felt displaced, but he couldn't be sure without proper examination. Copper whined and licked the woman's hand. The fingers twitched, just barely, but it was something. That's it, Garrett said. Come on, you've got someone here who needs you to wake up. He gently rubbed his knuckles against her sternum, a technique he'd learned decades ago to stimulate consciousness. The woman's face contorted slightly. A soft moan escaped her lips. That's good, Garrett encouraged. Keep coming back. Open your eyes for me. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Garrett kept up the sternal rub, applying steady pressure. Copper moved closer to her face, whining softly, insistently. The dog's anxiety was palpable, radiating through the small clearing like a physical force. Talk to her, Garrett said to Copper. Let her know you're here. Copper needed no encouragement. The dog pressed its nose against the woman's cheek, making small, distressed sounds. And finally, her eyes opened. Just slits at first, unfocused, confused. Hey, Garrett said gently. There you are. Stay with me now. What's your name? The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her eyes tried to focus on Garrett's face, but couldn't quite manage it. She blinked slowly, processing. Take your time, Garrett said. You've had a fall. You hit your head, but you're safe now. Can you tell me your name? Cold, she whispered. The word came out broken, barely audible. I know, I've got my jacket on you. Help is coming. They'll have blankets. What's your name? Her eyes drifted to the side, finding Copper. Recognition flickered across her face. Her hand moved weakly toward the dog. Copper, she breathed. The dog pressed against her palm, tail wagging frantically. Copper, Garrett repeated. That's his name. She managed the smallest nod. And what's your name? Her eyes closed again. Garrett felt a spike of concern. Hey, stay with me. Open your eyes. Tell me your name. Elena, she whispered without opening her eyes. Elena Sullivan. Elena. Good. That's good, Elena. I'm Garrett, Officer Garrett Blackwell. You're at Laurelhurst Park. Do you remember what happened? Her brow furrowed slightly. Walking with Copper. Morning walk. That's right. And then what? Slipped. The trail was wet. I slipped. Okay. You fell down into this ravine. Hit your head. Do you remember that? Cold, she said again. So cold. I know. Just a few more minutes and the paramedics will be here. They'll warm you up. But I need you to stay awake for me, Elena. Can you do that? Her eyes opened again, slightly more focused this time. She looked at Garrett properly, taking in his uniform, his face, his gray hair. You came, she said. Copper, he brought you. Garrett glanced at the dog, still pressed against her side. He did. Wouldn't take no for an answer. A faint smile touched Elena's lips. Stubborn. Saved your life, Garrett said. The smile faded, her eyes filled with tears. Thought I was gonna die. Couldn't move. Couldn't. So cold. You're not going to die, Garrett said firmly. Not today, not on my watch. Elena's gaze held his for a moment, and he saw belief flicker there. Trust. The kind of trust people placed in uniforms and badges and promises made by strangers who trained to save lives. The kind of trust Garrett hadn't felt worthy of in years. How long? She asked. How long was I here? Garrett checked his watch. 8:22 a.m. He looked back at Elena. What time did you start your walk? 7, maybe a little after. An hour and 20 minutes. Alone, injured, slowly losing body heat. If Copper had given up, if Garrett had driven away, if he'd waited for animal control instead of following his instinct, he pushed the thought aside. What mattered was now. Not much longer, he said. Just stay with me, Elena. Keep your eyes open. Tell me about Copper. How long have you had him? 6 months, she said. Her voice was getting slightly stronger. That was good. From the shelter, he was the last one. Nobody wanted him. Copper's ears perked up at the sound of his name. He'd been returned 3 times, Elena continued. Too energetic, too stubborn, too smart. People couldn't handle him. But you could, Garrett said. We needed each other, Elena whispered. I just lost someone. Moved here alone. He needed a home. I needed. She trailed it off. A reason, Garrett finished quietly. Elena's eyes found his again. Something passed between them. Recognition of a shared experience. Grief understood without explanation. Yeah, she said. Garrett's radio crackled. Unit 7 dispatch. He pulled it from his belt. Go ahead. Paramedics are 3 minutes out. Sergeant Holloway is also en route to your location. He wants a status update. Garrett's jaw tightened slightly. Sergeant Brian Holloway, 20 years younger than Garrett, career-focused, by the book, the kind of supervisor who'd never met a regulation he didn't love. Tell him I'm with the victim. Stable for now. I'll brief him when he arrives. Copy that. Garrett put the radio away and focused back on Elena. Her eyes had closed again. Elena, eyes open. Tired, she murmured. I know, but you can't sleep yet. Not until the paramedics check you out. Come on, talk to me. Where are you from? Seattle. Moved here last winter. What brought you to Portland? Fresh start, new city. Thought it would help. Did it? She was quiet for a moment. Some days, Copper helped more than the city did. Garrett understood that. After Margaret died, everyone had told him to take a vacation, go somewhere new, clear his head, as if geography could fix grief, as if different scenery would somehow make the empty house feel less empty. It didn't work that way. But purpose helped. Having something that needed you, something that depended on you. He looked at Copper, still vigilant, beside Elena. The dog hadn't relaxed for even a second. Every muscle was tense, every sense alert, protecting, waiting. He loves you, Garrett said quietly. Elena's hand moved weakly to rest on Copper's head. I know. In the distance, Garrett heard voices, the sound of equipment, people moving through the woods. That's the paramedics, he said. You hear them? Elena nodded slightly. Almost over. You did good, Elena. You held on. Because of you, she whispered. Because you listened to him. Garrett didn't know what to say to that, so he just stayed quiet, his hand resting on her shoulder, keeping that human connection alive while they waited. The voices grew louder, closer. Garrett could hear branches snapping, heavy footsteps on the trail above. Down here, he called out, in the ravine. A moment later, 2 paramedics appeared at the top of the slope, a woman in her 40s and a younger man, both in Portland fire and rescue uniforms. They carried equipment bags and a rescue basket. Portland fire, the woman called down. How's the patient? Conscious but weak, Garrett called back. Head trauma, possible concussion, early hypothermia. Pulse is thready. She's been down here approximately 90 minutes. Copy that. We're coming down. Watch yourselves. They began their descent, moving carefully with their equipment. It took them almost 5 minutes to reach the bottom, their heavy boots finding purchase on the same roots and rocks Garrett had used. The female paramedic, her name tag read, Martinez, knelt immediately beside Elena. Hi there, I'm Jessica. I'm going to take care of you, okay? Elena nodded weakly. Martinez began her assessment, checking vitals, examining the head wound, running through her protocols with efficient calm. Her partner, whose tag read Miller, set up their equipment and prepared the basket stretcher. Martinez pulled out a thermal blanket and wrapped it around Elena. We're going to get you warm and get you out of here. This might be uncomfortable, but we need to stabilize your neck first. She fitted a cervical collar around Elena's neck while Miller brought over a backboard. Copper whined anxiously as they began moving Elena. It's okay, boy, Garrett said quietly, placing a hand on the dog's head. Let them work. But Copper wouldn't leave Elena's side. As the paramedics carefully rolled her onto the backboard, the dog pressed closer, refusing to be separated. Sir, can you control the dog? Martinez asked, not unkindly. He won't leave her, Garrett said. We need space to work. Garrett looked down at Copper. The dog's gaze was fixed on Elena's face, watching every movement the paramedics made. This wasn't a dog that would be easily moved. He stays, Garrett said. He's not interfering. Just let him be close. Martinez glanced at him, reading something in his expression. She nodded. All right, but if he gets in the way, he won't. They secured Elena to the backboard with practiced efficiency. Her eyes had closed again, but her breathing seemed steadier now. Martinez started an IV pushing fluids to help with the hypothermia. "We're going to lift you now," she told Elena. "You're going to feel movement, but you're safe." The two paramedics lifted the backboard and carefully placed it in the rescue basket. Copper immediately positioned himself at Elena's side as close as he could get without actually climbing into the basket. "How are we getting her up?" Garrett asked. Miller gestured to the slope. "We'll use the rope system. Already set up at the top. It'll take about 10 minutes. Voices called from above. More personnel had arrived. Garrett heard the distinct sound of Sergeant Holloway's voice directing people. "Officer Blackwell, what's your status?" Garrett moved to where he could see up the slope. Holloway stood at the top, hands on his hips, looking down with an expression Garrett knew well. Irritation mixed with concern, mixed with that unique administrative frustration of a supervisor whose officer had gone off script. "Patient is stable and being prepared for extraction," Garrett called up. "I need to speak with you." "Now." "I'm assisting with the rescue. The paramedics have it handled. Get up here." Garrett looked at Elena in the basket, at Martinez and Miller preparing the ropes, at Copper, who hadn't taken his eyes off his owner. Then he looked back up at Holloway. "With respect, Sergeant, I'm staying with the victim until she's clear." Even from 15 feet away, Garrett could see Holloway's face redden. "That wasn't a request, officer." "Understood. Still staying." There was a long pause. Garrett could practically hear the gears turning through in Holloway's head. Insubordination, failure to follow direct orders, all the things that would normally result in disciplinary action. But Garrett was retiring in 3 weeks. What were they going to do, fire him? He was already leaving. The realization settled over him like a weight lifting. For the first time in decades, the consequences didn't matter. The protocol didn't matter. The rules didn't matter. What mattered was down here in this ravine. A woman who'd almost died. A dog who'd refused to let that happen. And a promise Garrett had made that she wouldn't die on his watch. "We'll discuss this later." Holloway finally set his voice tight. "Looking forward to it," Garrett replied. Martinez glanced at him with something that might have been respect. "You always talk to your sergeant like that." "First time in 20 years, Garrett said. "How's it feel?" Garrett considered the question. How did it feel to choose action over protocol? To trust his judgment over someone else's orders? To do what felt right instead of what was regulation? It felt like waking up after a very long sleep. "Good," he said simply. Martinez smiled. "All right, we're ready to move her." Miller signaled the team. Miller gave a whistle and a thumbs up to the crew waiting above. The rope system engaged with a mechanical whir. Slowly, carefully, the basket began to rise. Copper barked sharply. "Easy," Garrett said. He picked up the dog, who was small enough to hold despite squirming protests. "She's going up. We'll follow." The basket rose steadily, guided by the paramedics and the team above. Garrett watched it climb. His arms wrapped around a frantically worried dog, his jacket still wrapped around a woman he had found before it was too late. Before it was too late. For the first time in 5 years, since Margaret's diagnosis had come back terminal, since he'd realized that all his years of saving other people hadn't prepared him to save the one person who mattered most, for the first time he had made it before it was too late. The basket reached the top. Hands reached out, securing it, lifting Elena to solid ground. "Your turn," Martinez said to Garrett. "Can you make the climb with the dog?" Garrett looked at Copper, then at the slope. He wasn't 22 anymore. Wasn't even 42. His knees ached from kneeling on the cold ground. His back protested the idea of climbing with extra weight. But Copper was trembling in his arms, desperate to reach Elena. "Yeah," Garrett said. "I can make it." Martinez nodded. "We'll be right behind you." Garrett started the climb, Copper tucked against his chest with one arm, the other hand free to grab roots and rocks. His boots slipped twice. His free hand scraped against rough bark. His breath came in heavy pulls. But he kept going. Halfway up, his right boot lost purchase completely. He slid back a foot before catching himself on an exposed root. Copper yelped. Easy, Garrett muttered more to himself than the dog. Almost there. He could see the top now. Just a few more feet. His legs burned. His arm ached from holding Copper. Sweat ran down his back and despite the cold. 3 more feet. 2. Hands reached down. Strong hands. Young hands. Garrett grabbed them and let himself be pulled up the final distance, Copper still clutched against his chest. He emerged at the top of the ravine onto solid ground and immediately dropped to his knees, breathing hard. Copper squirmed free and bolted toward where Elena lay on a gurney already hooked to monitors. "You all right, old-timer?" The voice came from a young firefighter, maybe 25, grinning down at him. Old-timer. Garrett would have been offended if it wasn't accurate. "Fine," he managed between breaths. "Just need a minute." Sergeant Holloway appeared in his field of vision. "Blackwell, my office, tomorrow morning, 800. Garrett looked up and on him. Holloway was 44, fit, clean-shaven, everything by regulation. His uniform perfectly pressed even though he'd just hiked through the woods. "I'll be there," Garrett said. "This stunt you pulled saved a woman's life. You abandoned your assign and welfare check. You failed to wait for backup. You descended into a hazardous area without proper equipment or support. You found her before it was too late," Garrett finished. He got slowly to his feet, his knees protesting. "That's what matters." Holloway's face was tight with barely controlled anger. "That's not how this works. You don't get to decide which rules apply to you." "I've got 3 weeks left, Brian." Garrett rarely used Holloway's first name. The sergeant noticed. "And then none of this is my problem anymore. So yeah, today I decided which rules applied. You're still wearing that badge. While you're wearing it, you follow the rules." Garrett looked down at his badge. Number 2847, 42 years. He'd polished it every night for the first decade, wore it with pride, believed it meant something beyond metal and authority. Maybe it still did, just not the way he'd thought. "I followed the rule that mattered," Garrett said quietly. "Save lives, everything else is paperwork." He walked away before Holloway could respond, heading toward where the paramedics were loading Elena into the ambulance. Copper stood beside the gurney, refusing to be separated. Martinez saw Garrett approaching. "We're taking her to Emmanuel. You riding with us?" Garrett hesitated. He should return to his patrol car, file his report, handle the administrative fallout, do his job the way it was supposed to be done. He looked at Elena, still unconscious, her face pale against the white blanket, then at Copper, looking up at him with those trusting eyes. "Yeah," Garrett said, "I'm riding with you." They loaded the gurney into the ambulance. Copper jumped in without hesitation, positioning himself near Elena's head. Garrett climbed in behind them. Martinez raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Miller closed the doors. The ambulance started moving, sirens willing to life. Inside, the world reduced to the small space. Monitors beeped steadily. The IV dripped. Elena's chest rose and fell in shallow but consistent rhythm. Copper rested his head on the gurney beside her hand, and Garrett sat on the bench seat, his jacket gone, his uniform dirty, his knees aching, watching a woman he'd never met before this morning breathe in and out. He thought about the welfare check he'd never completed, the sergeant who wanted him in his office, the retirement that had seemed so important just a few hours ago. He'd been dreading it, counting down to what felt like an ending. But sitting here in this ambulance, watching this woman live because a dog had refused to give up and an old cop had finally trusted his instinct again, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. Garrett's hands were shaking slightly. He looked down at them, surprised. They'd been steady when he'd checked Elena's pulse, steady when he'd climbed down into the ravine, steady when he'd held Copper and climbed back up. But now, in the quiet of the ambulance, they shook. Martinez noticed. "You okay?" Garrett nodded, not trusting his voice. "First rescue in a while." He shook his head. "First rescue that mattered." That stopped him. He looked up at her, this paramedic he just met, and saw understanding in her eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. Something like that. She nodded and turned back to her patient, adjusting the IV flow, checking vitals, doing her job with the same steady competence he'd tried to bring to his own for 4 decades. Copper shifted position, moving closer to Elena's face. The dog's breathing had slowed. Not relaxed, Copper was still on high alert, but calmer, as if being here in motion, heading toward help was enough. Trust. That's what it was. The dog trusted that the humans would handle it from here. When had Garrett stopped trusting? When had he stopped believing that doing the right thing would lead to the right outcome? Margaret's diagnosis. That's when. When being a good cop hadn't mattered because cancer didn't care about badges or protocols or 40 years of service. When all his training and experience and instinct couldn't save the one person he had promised to protect and serve for the rest of his life. She died anyway. And Garrett had learned that sometimes trust wasn't enough. Sometimes trying wasn't enough. Sometimes you could do everything right and still lose. So he'd stopped trying, stopped trusting, just started going through the motions. Until this morning, until a puppy stood in the middle of the road and refused to move. The ambulance hit a bump. Elena's hand slid off the gurney. Copper immediately nosed it back up, then kept his muzzle pressed against her fingers. And something in Garrett's chest cracked. Not broke, cracked, like ice beginning to thaw. His eyes burned. He blinked hard, willing the sensation away. 42 years and he'd kept it together, seen things that would break most people, handled tragedy after tragedy with professional detachment. He wasn't going to break now, but his vision blurred anyway. Martinez was focused on her patient, not looking at him. Miller was driving. No one was watching. So Garrett let one tear fall. Just one. It ran down his weathered cheek and dropped onto his dirty uniform shirt. Then another. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping silent, because that dog had done what Garrett couldn't. Had refused to give up when giving up would have been easier. Had trusted that someone would listen when everyone else had walked away. And Elena had lived because of it. 42 years, hundreds of calls, thousands of interactions, and none of them had felt like this. This felt like it meant something. Garrett took a shaky breath and lowered his hands. His eyes were wet, but he didn't care. Martinez glanced over, saw his face, and simply nodded once. Understanding. No judgment. She's stabilizing, Martinez said quietly. You got to her just in time. Just in time. Garrett looked at Copper, still pressed against Elena's hand. He got to her in time, Garrett corrected. I just listened. That's the hard part, Martinez said. Listening. Yeah, it was. The ambulance turned into the hospital entrance. The sirens cut off. The doors opened, and suddenly there were more people, more movement, more noise. They pulled the gurney out. Copper jumped down, staying close. Garrett climbed out last, his legs stiff from sitting. Hospital staff swarmed Elena, wheeling her toward the emergency entrance. Information flew back and forth. Medical terms, numbers, protocols. Garrett stood in the ambulance bay, out of the way, no longer needed. Copper sat beside his boot, looking up at him. Waiting. Come on, Garrett said quietly. Let's follow her in. They walked through the automatic doors together. An old cop and a young dog. Both of them covered in dirt and scratches from the ravine. Both of them having done what they'd set out to do. Both of them changed by it in ways that would take time to understand. The waiting room at Emmanuel Hospital smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Garrett had been in dozens of hospital waiting rooms over his 42 years. They all smelled the same. They all felt the same. Time moved differently in these spaces. Slower, heavier. He sat in an orange plastic chair that had seen better decades, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. Copper lay at his feet, head on his paws, eyes fixed on the emergency room doors where they'd taken Elena. The clock on the wall read 9:47 a.m. Garrett stared at it, watching the second hand make its slow circuit. Tick, tick, tick. They'd been here 32 minutes. The ER staff had whisked Elena away immediately. A nurse had taken Garrett's statement name badge number how he'd found her. Then she disappeared behind those same doors and hadn't come back. So Garrett sat and waited. Copper shifted positions slightly, letting out a soft whine. "I know," Garrett said quietly. "Nothing to do but wait." The dog's ear twitched, but he didn't look away from the doors. A few other people occupied the waiting room. An elderly man holding a bloody towel to his hand, a young mother with a feverish toddler sleeping against her shoulder, a woman Garrett's age flipping through a magazine without really seeing it, all of them waiting, all of them suspended in that strange limbo between crisis and resolution. Garrett pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls, all from Sergeant Holloway. No messages. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without returning them. His uniform shirt was still dirty from the ravine. His knees hurt from the climb. His jacket was gone, still wrapped around Elena, somewhere in the treatment area. He should probably ask for it back eventually. He didn't move to do so. The automatic doors to the waiting room opened. A man in his 70s shuffled in, leaning heavily on a cane. He made his way to the reception desk, spoke quietly with the volunteer there, then turned and found a seat. Garrett watched him settle in, watched the way his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his position, the way he kept glancing at the emergency room doors with the same expression Garrett had seen on hundreds of faces over the years. Fear, hope, that terrible combination of both. How many waiting rooms had Margaret sat in? How many times had she watched doors like these, hoping for good news, preparing herself for bad? Garrett had tried to be there for all of them. The appointments, the treatments, the tests, but the job always seemed to call at the wrong time. An emergency here, a critical situation there, always something that needed him more urgently than his wife sitting in a hospital chair. She'd never complained, not once. She'd just smile that sad smile and say, "It's okay, I understand, people need you." But Nora hadn't understood. And after Margaret died, Nora had made sure Garrett knew exactly what she thought of a father who'd chosen strangers over family. "You were never there," she'd said at the funeral. Not yelling, just stating fact. Mom needed you and you were never there. Garrett had wanted to argue, to explain that he was trying to do good, to make a difference, to serve. But she'd been right. He hadn't been there. Not enough. Not when it mattered. And now Margaret was gone and Nora lived 3,000 miles away, and Garrett sat alone in waiting rooms with other people's emergencies. The clock read 10:15 a.m. His phone buzzed. Another call from Holloway. Garrett declined it. Copper lifted his head. Suddenly ears perked. A nurse had emerged from the emergency room doors. She scanned the waiting room, then her eyes landed on Garrett. "Officer Blackwell." Garrett stood immediately. "Yes." "Ms. Sullivan is stable. We've completed initial diagnostics. The doctor will be out to speak with you shortly." "Can I see her?" "Not just yet. She's undergoing additional tests, but she's conscious and responsive." "That's a good sign." Conscious, responsive, good sign. Relief washed through Garrett so suddenly his knees almost buckled. He sat back down. "Thank you," he managed. The nurse nodded and disappeared back through the doors. Copper's tail wagged once, twice, then stilled. Garrett looked down at the dog. "Did you hear that she's awake?" Copper's ears twitched. "She's going to be okay." The words felt strange in Garrett's mouth. Unfamiliar. When was the last time he'd said them and meant them? When was the last time someone had been okay? Not Margaret. She hadn't been okay. Not the dozens of accident victims he'd found too late over the years. Not the veteran he'd discovered frozen in that parking lot. Not the kid from Nora's high school who'd wrapped his car around a tree. But Elena. Elena was going to be okay. Because a dog wouldn't give up. And an old cop had finally listened. The clock read 11:33 a.m. Garrett's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday evening. The hospital cafeteria was probably open. He could grab something, but that would mean leaving the waiting room. Leaving Copper. Being somewhere else when the doctor came out. He stayed in the orange chair. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text, not from Holloway, from the administrative office. Officer Blackwell, please respond to confirm receipt of directive to report to Sergeant Holloway's office tomorrow, 0800. Failure to respond will result in administrative action. Garrett stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed back a single word. Confirmed. He put the phone away and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd deal with Holloway's anger. With the inevitable write-up for insubordination. With the bureaucratic consequences of choosing action over protocol. Tomorrow. Today he was exactly where he needed to be. The clock read 12:49 p.m. The waiting room had cycled through different people. The elderly man with the cut hand had been called back then, released with stitches. The young mother and her toddler had gone home with antibiotics. New faces had arrived. New emergencies. New anxieties. Garrett remained. Copper hadn't moved except to occasionally shift position. The dog's dedication was absolute. Unwavering. Garrett found himself studying the animal. 9 months old, Elena had said. Still practically a puppy. And yet the intelligence in those eyes, the determined focus, the refusal to abandon his person that wasn't training, that was something deeper. Love, maybe. Loyalty, certainly. The kind of loyalty Garrett had tried to give the badge, the job, the city, but he'd never given it to the people who'd actually needed it. Margaret, Nora, the family that had stood beside him for decades while he stood beside strangers. Copper would never make that mistake. For Copper, the hierarchy was simple. Elena first, everything else second. No competing priorities, no divided loyalties, just pure, uncomplicated devotion. Garrett envied that clarity. The emergency room doors opened again. This time a man in scrubs emerged. Late 50s graying hair, the kind of calm expression that came from delivering both good news and bad news too many times to count. Officer Blackwell, Garrett stood. That's me. I'm Dr. Warren. I've been treating Ms. Sullivan. He gestured to a quieter corner of the waiting room. Can we talk for a moment? Garrett's chest tightened. He followed the Dr. Copper trailing at his heels. They stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot. Dr. Warren pulled out a tablet, checking notes. First, the good news, he said. Miss Sullivan is going to make a full recovery. The tightness in Garrett's chest released so suddenly he actually exhaled aloud. Dr. Warren continued. She has a mild concussion and a laceration on her scalp that required 12 stitches. She was in the early stages of hypothermia when she arrived, but we've successfully warmed her core temperature. No signs of internal bleeding or spinal injury. All things considered, she was remarkably fortunate. Fortunate. Garrett looked down at Copper. She had help. Dr. Warren followed his gaze and smiled slightly. So I have been told. A very determined dog, from what I understand. The most determined I've ever seen. Well, his determination saved her life. Another 30 minutes of exposure, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Dr. Warren's expression grew more serious. You got to her just in time, officer. Just in time. Those 3 words hit Garrett harder than he expected. His throat tightened. His eyes burned. Can I see her? He asked, his voice rougher than intended. In a few minutes. We're moving her to a room now. She's been asking about 2 things. Her dog and the officer who found her. She's been asking for me. Wants to thank you properly, she said. Dr. Warren glanced at his tablet again. We're keeping her overnight for observation. Standard procedure with head trauma. But barring any complications, she should be released tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. Lena would go home, resume her life, walk Copper in that same park, probably more carefully this time, and Garrett would go back to his patrol car, his empty house and his retirement paperwork, and his meeting with Sergeant Holloway. And then what Officer Blackwell, Garrett realized he'd been staring out the window without seeing anything. Sorry, yes. When can I see her? Give us about 15 minutes, room 412, 4th floor. The volunteer at the desk can direct you. Dr. Warren extended his hand. Garrett shook it. You did good work today, the doctor said. Not many people would have followed that dog into the woods. Garrett looked down at Copper again. He didn't give me much choice. Dr. Warren smiled. The good ones never do. He walked away back through the emergency room doors. Garrett stood at the window for a long moment, Copper sitting patiently beside him. 4 floors up, a woman he had never met before this morning was asking to see him, wanting to thank him for saving her life. But he hadn't saved her life. Not really. Copper had. Garrett had just been the one who finally listened. The clock read 1:47 p.m. Room 412 was at the end of a quiet hallway. Garrett stood outside the door, suddenly uncertain. Copper sat beside him, tail wagging slowly, ready to be reunited with Elena. But Garrett hesitated. What was he supposed to say? "You're welcome" felt inadequate. Just doing my job felt like a lie. He hadn't been doing his job. He'd been doing something else. Something he couldn't quite name. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it again. 42 years, and he'd had this conversation dozens of times. The grateful victim, the relieved family member, the tearful thank you. He'd always known exactly what to say. The script was simple, professional, deflecting. But standing here now, he had no idea what words were supposed to come next. The door opened before he could decide. A nurse stepped out, nearly colliding with him. "Oh, you must be Officer Blackwell. She's been waiting for you, and I suspect this gentleman has too." She smiled at Copper. "Go ahead in." She walked away before Garrett could respond. The door stood open. Garrett took a breath and stepped inside. The room was small, standard hospital setup. One bed, one window, one television mounted to the wall. Elena lay propped up against pillows, her blonde hair clean, now the wound on her temple covered with a white bandage. An IV ran to her arm. A monitor beeped steadily beside the bed. She looked fragile in the hospital gown. Pale, young, alive. Her eyes found Copper first. They filled with tears immediately. "Copper," she breathed. The dog needed no further invitation. He crossed the room in 3 bounds and carefully placed his front paws on the edge of the bed. Elena wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his fur. She was crying. Soft, broken sounds of relief and love and overwhelming emotion. Garrett stood just inside the doorway, feeling like an intruder on a private moment. But Elena looked up at him through her tears. "You came," she said. "The doctor said you wanted to see me. I wanted to thank you." She didn't let go of Copper. "They told me what happened, how Copper found you, how you followed him, how you climbed down to get me." Garrett shook his head. "Copper did the hard part. You could have ignored him. Most people would have. I almost did. But you didn't." Elena's voice broke slightly. "I remember lying there, in the cold, knowing I couldn't get up, couldn't call for help, knowing that no one knew where I was, that I might just fade." She paused, composing herself. "And then I felt Copper pressed against me, keeping me warm, and I knew he'd gone for help. I didn't know if anyone would come, but he tried, and that was—" She couldn't finish. Garrett moved closer to the bed, not too close, just enough to close some of the distance. "You raised a good dog," he said quietly. Elena managed a small smile through her tears. "He saved my life." "He did. But you saved me too. You listened to him. You trusted him." Garrett looked at Copper, still pressed against Elena, tail wagging slowly. "He made it pretty hard not to." Elena's hand found Garrett's arm. Her grip was weak but deliberate. "Thank you. I don't know how else to say it. Just thank you." And that's when it hit Garrett. The full weight of what had almost happened. What would have happened if he'd driven away, if he'd waited for animal control, if he'd followed procedure and protocol and all the rules that made sense on paper but didn't account for instinct and trust in a dog who refused to give up. Elena would have died. Alone, cold, slowly fading in a ravine while morning joggers passed by 50 yards away, never knowing she was there. And Garrett would have finished his shift, gone home, counted down one more day toward retirement, never knowing he'd walked away from the most important call of his 42-year career. His hands started shaking again. Elena noticed. "Are you okay?" Garrett tried to speak but couldn't. The words lodged in his throat. His vision blurred. Officer Blackwell. He turned away, facing the window, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The dam had cracked, and now it was breaking completely. 42 years of holding it together, 42 years of professional detachment, of showing up and doing the job and not letting it touch him too deeply because that's what survival required. All of it came crashing down. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged gasps. Tears ran down his weathered face and he couldn't stop them because he'd been so close to walking away. So close to being the man Nora thought he was, the man who chose rules over people, protocol over instinct, the safe choice over the right one. And a dog had saved him from that, had refused to let him make that choice. "I'm sorry," he managed. "I'm sorry I don't." He felt Elena's hand on his arm again, gentle, understanding. "It's okay," she said softly. But it wasn't okay. None of it was okay. "I've spent 5 years counting down," Garrett said, the words tumbling out now. 5 years since my wife died, just going through the motions, showing up, doing the minimum, waiting for it to be over." He wiped his face roughly with his hand. "And this morning I almost did the same thing. Almost walked away from you because that would have been easier, because I've forgotten how to do anything else." He turned back to face her. His eyes were red. His face was wet. He didn't care. "Your dog reminded me," he said. "He reminded me why I put this badge on 42 years ago. And I'd forgotten. I'd completely forgotten." Elena's own eyes were filled with tears. "You remembered when it mattered." "Barely." "But you did." Garrett looked at Copper. The dog was watching him now, head tilted slightly, seeing more than a dog should be able to see. "Thank you," Garrett said to him, "for not giving up. On her. On me." Copper's tail wagged, and Garrett laughed. It came out wet and broken, but it was a laugh. An actual laugh. The first one in longer than he could remember. "I'm talking to a dumb," he said. Elena smiled. "He's a good listener." "The best." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The monitor beeped. The IV dripped. Copper's tail created a steady rhythm against the bed frame. Garrett's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another message from Holloway. But the name on the screen made him freeze. Nora, his daughter, calling him in the middle of the day. Not Christmas, not his birthday. Just calling. "I should..." Garrett gestured vaguely with the phone. "Take it," Elena said. "I'm not going anywhere." Garrett stepped into the hallway and answered. "Nora." "Dad." Her voice was tight, emotional. "Dad, I just saw the news." "What news?" "You're on the news. Portland police officer follows dog through park, saves woman's life. It's going viral on social media." "Dad, that was you." Garrett's mind struggled to process this. "How did you..." "Someone filmed you at the hospital, getting out of the ambulance with a tune. It's everywhere. I've seen it shared like 50 times in the last hour." Viral. The word felt foreign. Garrett barely understood social media. He had accounts he never checked and a Facebook page he'd set up once and forgotten about. "Dad, I'm so proud of you." Garrett's throat tightened again. "Nora." "No, listen. I need to say this." She took a breath. "I've been angry at you for so long. For not being there. For choosing that up. For all of it. You had every right to be angry. Maybe, but I was wrong about something." Her voice cracked. "I thought you chose the job over us because we didn't matter enough. Because we weren't important." "Nora, that's not..." I know that now. You chose to help people. That's who you are. And I punished you for it because Mom died and I needed someone to blame." Garrett leaned against the wall. His knees felt weak. "But seeing you today, Nora continued, reading the story, how you followed that dog, how you climbed down to save the stranger, how you wouldn't leave her side. That's who you've always been. And Mom knew that. She understood that. I couldn't. I should have been there more, Garrett said. For both of you. Yeah, you should have. But you were also out there saving people like this woman today. And that mattered too. I'm starting to understand that it mattered. Garrett closed his eyes. Tears leaked out anyway. I want to visit, Nora said. When's your retirement? I want to be there. November 5th. I'll be there. I'll take time off work. I'll be there, Dad. Nora, you don't have to. I want to. Please. The word please broke something in Garrett. His daughter, his only child, asking to be part of his life again. I'd like that, he managed. I'd like that very much. Okay, good. He could hear her smiling through the phone. And Dad, yeah, what you did today. That's the dad I remember. The one who'd rush out in the middle of the night because someone needed help. The one who believed in doing the right thing. I'm sorry I forgot him. I'd forgotten him too, Garrett said quietly. Took a stubborn dog to remind me. Nora laughed, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't heard from her in years. I love you, Dad. When was the last time she'd said that Garrett couldn't remember? I love you too, sweetheart. They talked for a few more minutes, made plans, promised to stay in touch. When Garrett finally hung up, he stood in the hallway for a long moment staring at his phone. His daughter was coming to his retirement. His daughter had said she was proud of him. His daughter had called him Dad without it sounding like an obligation. All because he'd followed a dog into the woods. Garrett wiped his face one more time and went back into Elena's room. She looked up when he entered. Everything okay? Yeah, Garrett said. And for the first time in 5 years, he meant it. Everything's okay. The days that followed passed in a blur. Garrett filed his report, sat through the inevitable meeting with Sergeant Holloway, who'd written him up for insubordination, but couldn't quite hide the grudging respect in his eyes. Finished his remaining shifts with a strange lightness he hadn't felt in years. The story had indeed gone viral. Local news picked it up, then regional, then national. Veteran officer's final act of service, the headlines read. Garrett ignored most of it. He wasn't good at interviews, didn't like cameras. But Elena had recovered quickly. She'd been released from the hospital the next day just as Dr. Warren had predicted. Garrett had stopped by to check on her before his shift. How are you feeling, he'd asked. Better? Good. Thanks to you. Thanks to Copper. Elena had smiled at that. Thanks to both of you. They'd exchanged phone numbers. Garrett wasn't sure why, just felt like the thing to do. Two people who'd been through something together. She'd texted him a few days later. Just a simple message. Copper and I are going for coffee. Want to join us? Garrett had stared at his phone for a full minute before responding. Yeah, I'd like that. The retirement ceremony took place 3 weeks later on a crisp November morning. The Portland Police Bureau's assembly room was packed. Officers in dress uniforms, city officials, reporters. Garrett stood at attention while the police chief read his commendation. 42 years of distinguished service, hundreds of lives saved, countless acts of courage and dedication. Officer Garrett Blackwell represents the finest traditions of the Portland Police Department. Garrett barely heard the words. He was scanning the crowd, looking for a face he'd been told would be there. And then he saw her. Nora, standing in the back, wearing a blue dress, smiling. Next to her, Elena and Copper. They'd come, all three of them. The chief continued, but Officer Blackwell's final act of service exemplifies not just his dedication to duty, but his willingness to trust his instincts in the service of saving lives. He gestured to Elena and Copper. Ms. Sullivan is alive today because Officer Blackwell chose to listen, to trust, to follow where others might have turned away. Copper, wearing a small honorary badge on his collar, sat perfectly still beside Elena. The dog's eyes found Garrett across the room. It is therefore my honor, the chief said, to present Officer Garrett Blackwell with the Medal of Valor for life-saving action above and beyond the call of duty. Applause filled the room. Garrett accepted the medal in its velvet box, shook the chief's hand, posed for photos. But his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, to his daughter, to the woman he'd saved, to the dog who'd saved them both. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and congratulations and backslaps from fellow officers, Garrett finally made his way through the crowd to where they waited. Nora hugged him first, hard, longer than she had in years. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. "I'm glad you're here." Elena was next. She looked healthy, fully recovered. The scar on her temple was barely visible. "Thank you for coming," Garrett said. "Wouldn't miss it," Copper insisted. She smiled down at the dog. Garrett crouched, bringing himself to Copper's level. The dog's tail wagged. "Hey, partner," Garrett said quietly. "Thanks for everything." Copper licked his hand once, then sat back, tail still wagging, looking pleased with himself. "What are you going to do now?" Elena asked. Now that you are retired, Garrett had thought about this question constantly for the past 3 weeks. The answer used to terrify him. Empty days, no purpose, waiting to fade. But the answer had changed. "I'm going to volunteer," he said, "at the animal shelter where Copper came from, helping train rescue dogs, helping them find homes." Elena's eyes lit up. "Really? Seemed like the right thing to do. Copper showed me what these dogs are capable of. Maybe I can help other people see that too." "That's perfect," Nora said. "That's really perfect, Dad." It was. 1 month later, Garrett stood in the same shelter where Elena had found Copper 6 months earlier. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, no uniform, no badge, just a civilian volunteer working with a young German shepherd who'd been returned twice for being too energetic. "She just needs patience," Garrett told the shelter director, "and someone willing to listen." Elena appeared in the doorway, Copper at her side. She'd been visiting the shelter weekly, helping with adoptions, sharing Copper's story. "How's it going?" she asked. Garrett looked at the German shepherd, who was finally starting to trust him. "Good, really good." "Want to grab coffee after? There's a place down the street?" "Yeah, I'd like that." They walked to the coffee shop together, Copper trotting between them. The December air was cold, but not unpleasant. Portland was beautiful in the winter. Over coffee, Elena told him about her latest freelance project. Garrett told her about the 3 dogs he had helped place that week. Copper slept under the table content. It wasn't a date, not exactly. Just 2 people who'd been through something together, building something that felt like friendship. Maybe more eventually, maybe not. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Garrett wasn't alone anymore, wasn't counting down, wasn't waiting for his life to end. He was living it. His phone buzzed, a text from Nora. "Coming to visit next weekend, making you dinner. No arguments." Garrett smiled and typed back, "Looking forward to it." He put the phone away and looked across the table at Elena. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," Garrett said, "I really am." That evening, Garrett drove to Laurelhurst Park, the same trails he'd walked that October morning. He parked and got out, zipping his jacket against the cold. He walked the path Copper had led him down, past the fork, past the narrowing trail, to the clearing where the ravine dropped away. The disturbed ground had settled. Nature had reclaimed the signs of crisis. Only Garrett knew what had happened here. He stood at the edge and looked down into the ravine, the place where he'd found Elena, where everything had changed. "Thank you," he said quietly to no one and everyone. To Margaret maybe, to fate, to second chances, to a dog who'd refused to give up. He placed his hand on a tree and stood there for a moment, remembering, not with pain now, with gratitude. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. Garrett Blackwell was 64 years old. He'd spent 42 years answering calls, saving lives, serving his city. But the most important call he'd ever answered had come from a 9-month-old dog standing in the middle of the road. A dog who taught him that trust wasn't weakness, that instinct mattered, that it was never too late to remember who you were supposed to be. He thought his life was ending. He'd been wrong. It was just beginning.